So thank you so much. There you are. Yeah. Thanks so much for your presentation. I believe we can all agree that the things you mentioned will be, the main drivers of this of change. They will certainly determine the future of mobility we're going to talk about. But before we get more into that, I want to check how far into that future of mobility we already are in this room. So let me ask you guys a question. So how many of you are using a shared mobility service provider? So something like Drive Now, Car2Go.
Only Drive Now, right?
Okay. How many of you have ever driven an electric car? Wow, that's more than, okay, pretty good. Who of you has ever driven not really autonomous car because they're not really out there too much, but something like an autonomous car? Okay, perfect. And the last thing you mentioned was connectivity, and that's the most interesting part for me because I want to know how many people here interact with their car by putting a €3 plastic device into the ventilation slits in their car and put their phone onto the dashboard. Okay, yes. So that's good. So I mean, we can see that we are already a few steps into this future, but there's still a long way to go. And I believe it would be very interesting to go beyond these keywords you mentioned and really take a look at what this future is going to look like. So maybe we can start off with a little exercise and we can immerse ourselves in this future of mobility and think about how are we going to do a typical car ride in a time when all these things you mentioned are already in place, they're implemented. The cars are fully autonomous, they can interact with each other, they're connected, maybe we're sharing them. So maybe imagine you going to the office from your home. Are you going to grab a key? Are you going to go to your own car? What are you going to do? So,
well, if it's summer, I'll probably take the bike, but that's a different story. Well, if I am at home and my digital life knows what I have to do on that day and knows my itinerary, knows what weather it is, it will probably order me a car and just have something waiting for me whenever I want to leave. Probably not grab anything. I might just ask, hey, I need to go to work. What do you have for me? And a car shows up, I can get in. If it's nice weather, probably a convertible, and then drive to work.
Is it only going to be you in the car, or is it going to be shared, or?
Well, that's probably personal preference.
You can't share that. That's
well, it's personal preference depending on who you want to share with, right? This could be either or. At some days, you probably want to drive alone. On others, you might want to have company and drive in a shuttle kind of service. It's also probably cost dependent.
Okay, so it's kind of like an anything goes future. It's whatever you want, it's there.
I personally believe that the ability to offer mobility in the future will be there, that we can have the choice, or the user has the choice of how he wants to get to work. And this can be by personal transport, and it can be by a shared shuttle service. And in some cases, maybe there's still ownership. And there we have to differentiate between a morning commute and the pleasure of driving, right? That's still two different touch points.
So what do you think about that? I mean, you're thinking about these things all the time, and I would love to hear how you're going to get to work.
I think most important for me is that in the future of mobility, I want to own my own data, right? So I want to own my own data, and I want my own digital assistant to know what my mobility preferences are. And since all of my data is open to my assistant, it can help me figure out what's the best mode of transportation at a given point, yeah? Given the traffic situation, parking situation. It may suggest that I go on a shared ride with somebody, or I walk or bike or take public transportation or some other form of transportation, right? So it's really my individual needs and my data driven and my digital assistant learning from my behavior and preferences to really figure out what's the best option at a given point in time.
So what you never mentioned is driving by yourself, like actually steering a car. What do you think? Are we ever going to steer cars again in this future, or are cars going to be like ponies today? So we're going out of the city, riding a horse or riding a pony as a hobby because we like doing that. I mean, your claim is Freude am Fahren, or used to be. I don't know if it still is. How are we going to have this Freude am Fahren, which means I'm maneuvering a nice vehicle around in this future? Are we going to do that? Is it going to be, a real thing?
Depending on the time we're looking at, but I think the somehow near future, let's talk 2030 maybe, to give a time frame. I do think that the ownership model, as I talked about, is still there. There will be room for that somehow on that planet, probably reduced. And there, I think the question will be: will regulation allow for self-driving if the machine is so much better than the human is? And that's, I think, a question that is unanswered, because we don't know yet how good this autonomous driving will be. But we must assume it's perfect. So it must be better than humans in essence. So that will be a difficult question. I think in an urban area, looking at, I mean, we heard it from this colleague, 108 cities with more than a million people in China, growing at a tremendous rate. There is just no room for cars standing around for 23 hours being unused. It's just not, it's neither economical, nor is it, anyhow, does it make sense for city builders and keep life alive in cities. So I do believe in an urban area, I can foresee that ownership will die, and we must use individual transport, which I described, and which I believe is much in the sense that the gentlemen have described it. But again, let's emphasize also a little bit on the idea of that device, that vehicle, or that transportation mean, however it will look like, as being something that I use to my personal preference. So whatever I want to use in there, whatever I want to see or do, or is possible in the given, let's say, confines of space. And I think this is the interesting idea about it. How can we use this living room in a meaningful way? Also, depending on what my journey is, if I want to get quickly from A to B, now what's the purpose of using the car as a big screen and stuff like that? Because I might not even have time for it. But depending on the journey, it might alter completely, and I use it fully, which then means that the car must be enabled to do all of this up front, whether I buy it for that period of time as a service or not.
Let's stay with this idea a little bit. I mean, car designers like to talk about the interior of the car as the third living space. So something between the office and our own home. We're going to spend time in there, not driving, so we can do things we haven't done before in the car. What do you believe is the car of the future going to look like? Is it going to be an office on wheels? Is it going to be a comfortable, nice, like couch loungy area? Is it going to be a yoga studio? I know someone who's really planning to do that. So what do you think are we going to do in the car when we don't have to drive anymore? What is this third living space going to look like?
There will be very different living spaces, right? Because on every given day you might have different preference. But I do imagine that one thing, what you do on a train today, is either work or you look for content and get entertained. Yeah, watch a video on Netflix or on another service, listen to music, or you simply want to shut down and relax. So there will be different options. A yoga studio on wheels would be interesting. Haven't seen that yet, neither on the train or in a car. So that might be a solution to include the workout time in your commute. But I don't think there's the answer for that. For me personally, I believe there will be, from a user preference point of view, so many different ideas coming up that the service providers will adapt and will offer you actually anything you want in a niche or in mainstream from a commuting vehicle.
Okay. So what's I think likely going to happen is that the whole interior is going to be very different, and it's going to be very modular and adaptive to the different context, right? So that a car could actually change, be reconfigured in terms of the interior, yeah? From maybe in the morning rush hour, it can transport as many passengers as possible, to then later in the day doing deliveries, and it turns into a little delivery van, yeah? So I think it's going to be very modular, and the vehicle will adapt. And there'll be, of course, different kinds of vehicles out there. We'll maybe also see more like buses, right? That really will support, mass transit and may challenge even public transportation, right? And you will sit together with 8 or 10 people in a car in the future as you commute to work.
In order to make sure that the cars can adapt to our very personal needs, the car needs to be very well connected with us. And as you mentioned, there are a lot of new ideas how we do that. You're partnering with a lot of big digital players to make sure that this connection is working. Isn't this also kind of risky? Because I was thinking, don't you want to own this space? Aren't you afraid that the actual car, the actual vehicle will become a commodity and the Googles and the Facebooks and whoever your partners are will implement new business models on top of that, and what's left for you is a very, very thin profit margin that you can make with actually building vehicles?
I think the risk is there. There's no denying it. The answer to that is if you as an OEM today are able to solve relevant consumer problems in a meaningful way, then I don't think that there's any more right to play for those guys, for the big guys from the internet, than for us. But we certainly, I said that we cannot do it alone. I mean, there will be a combination of things. But I do believe, and that's clearly something where also, let's say, data privacy and other topics are concerned, we do believe that we need to give the consumer the right on their data in the car and in their, let's say, digital space back, or we need to give it to them, and also need to protect it in a way that we do believe that it's necessary to make sure that the car is, from a security point of view, also protected from other players. And it's a very simple, let's say, analogy or topic. If you look at computers today, of course, you could imagine, let's say, all kinds of partners doing all kinds of software on there. But a car is not a computer. You can probably kill somebody with throwing a computer at him, but that's a really a different topic than having an autonomously or semi-autonomously or even self-driven car riding into a group of people because some software is interfering with the steering systems, and there are 70 of them in the car. We need to really make sure that this is not happening. And that is also one of the important things where we need to layer the software in the car and make sure that there are protected areas.
Okay. So, I mean, Google has been building technology for autonomous cars. When they even built these tiny little cute cars. So my question to you related to that is, why did you do that? I mean, did you just like building, or do you think Google just liked cars and so they also wanted to give it a try to build one? Or what's, does it have to do anything with the data, maybe, is there any relation to what he just mentioned?
So first of all, the idea behind building a self-driving car came about somewhere around 2009 from one of our founders. And the idea was to make or use technology to solve some real problems. And traffic is one of those, and especially traffic casualties is one of those problems. And mainly the one responsible are the human drivers for that. So that was the initial thought. Google is not building any cars. It's a sister company. It's called Waymo. And it's both under the Alphabet company. The idea of building the car you mentioned is to be a technology platform to enable radar, LiDAR, and cameras to fit into a car. Because back then, Waymo didn't have the partners to actually produce that car to their specifications, so it was actually probably a better idea to build it themselves. And this, by the way, has been discontinued. So there's no intention for Waymo to build any car. Mm-hmm. They're concerned about building a safer driver and the technology which comes with that.
Okay. What is your take on that? Do you believe that?
Yeah, I believe it because it's way too painful to build a car. The German auto industry, of course, especially, and also other manufacturers, they have really done a great job at building a really complex value chain, right? And really building vehicles to very strict compliance requirements and with very few quality defects, yeah? So this is, Google has no interest in doing that because it's a low margin business, yeah? I think what really is the goal of Google ultimately is, of course, to make us get rid of driving so that we can consume more internet services, right? That's, of course, for any internet services platform a good way to extend the time that we can spend on these services. Yeah? So the challenge, I think, now for the OEM is how do you really create the engagement with the customer and And how can you monetize this time, right? Because the BMW ultimately ships the hardware, yeah? And now if monetization shifts to services, and of course Google, Amazon, and all these players have services that people use every day, it's going to be challenging to kind of compete with that, because like you guys have like 20 million cars out there, right? And you have like billions of Android devices to start with, and billions of search queries a day, and YouTube users, and so on, right? So this is going to be very challenging, right? And you know, and one thing that I think the auto industry has to quickly learn is, you know, think about today when you buy a car, you basically have this long list of options, right? And you know, the more you know things you buy, that's the time of monetization, yeah. But ultimately, when you actually use the car, nobody really cares if you use that massage function in the seat and whatever, and it's kind of hidden deep in that infotainment menu, right? In the future now, of course, when it's shared mobility, we need to really create truly engaging, intuitive experiences where, you know, it's not actually going to be even you finding the feature, but you know, there will be all these passenger-facing cameras and sensors that will measure your heart rate and all kinds of data in the car, and we need to make sure that data is protected and owned by you as the consumer. But this can also give them information and clues about what kind of features does the user now need in this given context, right? And we will then monetize this on demand. So when you feel like a massage, you know, the car will need to know before you know that you need a massage. And with micropayments, using blockchain technologies, for example, you will monetize these kinds of features that are already built into the car. Yeah? So, but in order to achieve that, right, we need to make sure that we create user experiences that are truly intuitive and we can anticipate, similar to what Google today, right? As I already type, you know what I'm going to actually, you can complete my search, right? So we need to bring that model to the car, where the car anticipates what we will need before we know it, and become a true personal companion, where my car behaves very differently when I drive it versus my partner drives it.
So just to respond to that, I think there is a way to have more time and use the time well in your car or in the transport mechanism of the future.
Just want to add one number because it's so fascinating. It's on average 1 billion people spend 50 minutes every day with actively driving a car. So if you add that up, it's a lot of time, you know, players can do something with or offer something for. And so, yeah, sorry.
And I think that is exactly the point. To offer the right service for consumers or in that commuters, what they need in that time is the key. I don't think that we have an advantage over that. You have a user who has a preference, and the preference should be met, or the need should be met. I don't believe people will start searching all over the place all the time if they commute and click on ads. I don't think that's the business model. I think they will utilize the time useful for themselves of consuming content, using it to engage with other people, actually, not digitally, but like in real life if you have a shared transport mechanism. So I think more time is good, and also for all players who offer digital services is good, because if they offer the right service, which can be used in that time and be useful, that will solve a problem of having not enough time to do stuff, but offering people more time.
The thing is, I mean, people are carrying their mobile phones with them 24/7. They even put it next to their beds. People only spend maybe an hour a day in a car. So you know these people driving around in cars way, way better than any car manufacturer will ever be able to know them. So are you already thinking, or is someone already thinking about services that are specifically designed for people sitting in a car?
But don't forget, there's one aspect to what you said. They know a lot about their consumers, I'm sure about this. But during driving, you're actually not allowed to use your mobile phone. You can track where they are, maybe, but you're not allowed to use it, right? And that's also still a domain of where the OEMs could play a real role and do play a role, because first of all, this hour driving time is not leisure time. You need to be concentrated on traffic today in our level 2 driving, okay? Secondly, you are not allowed to use that phone while you're driving. Now, but you're allowed to use the built-in capabilities of the car, because they are secured in the way that there's no driver distraction. So if we now learn as OEMs, which we do, which I try to show in my presentation, if we try to learn what Alexander said, what consumers are using more and more in the car, we are able to solve their issues during that drive time. Now we actually create a connection with the user that some of our joint competitors do not have. And I think that's certainly something we can play on. But it's not alone, because again, there's an outside world. We need to bring things together to make them meaningful.
What I found interesting is something you mentioned earlier. So the car will, of course, already has a lot of cameras facing outwards and sensors, but we will also be measuring what's happening inside. There will be cameras looking at the driver and censoring what's happening inside. So a car is like this amazing machine that's collecting data on so many levels. How do we keep this safe? How do I know that when you don't like my jokes, you will call your friends at Google and they will make it drive down a cliff, or they will, hack into the system and know anything about me, where I go, who I meet? I mean, how do we make sure that this privacy problem or this potential privacy problem doesn't happen? Who would like to answer that very hard question?
There's two things to it, right? One is safety, and one thing that we all need to be concerned about is the car of today is based on an architecture that basically comes from the 80s, right? The electronic control unit was first introduced in 81 in a GM. And over years, there's more ECU built and they become a bit more complex and so on. So now you have like 80 to 100 ECUs in that car. Yeah? So these create a huge attack surface for a hacker. Yeah? The good thing is today there's nothing interesting in a car to be hacked. Yeah? But
that's going to change.
That's going to change, right? And also when you think about there's this convergence of mobility with the energy and communication infrastructure, right? Because you have electric mobility, so these cars will plug into an electric charging station. You need to use the network, of course, to find the electric charging station or to bring services to the car. Yeah? So now any of these connected devices can be an entry point for a hacker. And once you are in the car, it's very easy to take over the vehicle and do serious damage. Yeah? I mean, remote control the vehicle and so on. Yeah? So I think one thing that the industry should do is to really re-platform and really embrace a totally new architecture that is built for this future of autonomous cars, because you can't build an autonomous robotic system on an architecture of the 80s. Yeah? So that's the safety side of things. Yeah? The other thing is now how do we protect the privacy? I think there's a lot of value in the data that sensors can generate, also wearable devices can generate, but we need to be very concerned about who owns and controls that data and who do we share this data with. Yeah? It shouldn't be that there's like, as we buy a car or as we use a mobility service, that there's one blanket statement and we just, like we do today, we accept the 60 pages of terms and conditions and we give away our firstborn as part of it. Yeah? So we need to be in control of our data, and I'm very passionate about blockchain technologies and distributed ledger technologies as a way to maintain that ownership of data and to decide which data do we share with which value chain partner, right? Because when you think about a connected vehicle...
Just one question. I mean, we're all blockchain experts and we know exactly how it works. Yeah, but maybe you could describe a little more how would this really function? How would I choose what data goes where?
Yeah. So the blockchain, as you know, is the underlying technology of like Bitcoin, right? It is essentially a distributed data database. What's interesting about it is that it gives you an identity mechanism that is really a shared identity mechanism. So you don't have a bank or other platform players that create an ID, but we have a shared identity where we establish trust in the network amongst peers. Yeah? So there's no Facebook ID or a bank or who validates those identities. But it's really the network that can figure that out. And we can also transfer assets and also do monetary exchange peer-to-peer in that infrastructure. So I think it's a very powerful capability, because on the one hand, in the future of the machine economy, right, an autonomous car will become its own economic agent. Yeah? It will have to have a trusted connectivity with a charging station, And that charging station may be based on inductive charging, so there will be very small transactions, yeah? And the blockchain can enable micro payments, yeah? So we could effectively have these machines communicate with each other and transact amongst each other without the need for a bank and the associated fees, yeah? On the other hand, I also see the opportunity now to really create a true sharing economy, right? So when we think about, car sharing, if I could actually share my vehicle with somebody that I don't know, but the blockchain establishes the trust, we can have reputation and so on, so I can share my car with pretty much anybody that meets certain criteria, and we can then transact peer-to-peer, is a very powerful way to disintermediate platforms and to give us as the consumers the power, right? And maybe the last point is I'm really passionate about making sure we own the data and control this data, because I think there's huge potential in having all these sensors that collect all this data so that our vehicle can become truly our companion and be truly personalized to us, yeah? It can anticipate my needs and behave differently depending on who is driving it or who is sitting in the vehicle. For example, you can imagine that easily, as you have simply a camera, you can detect the mood of a person, yeah? So you can detect road rage, right? As you start to curse and so on, right? So the car could say, hey, you seem like a little bit agitated, why don't I take over, and we go into autonomous mode now, right?
That's going to work great.
But the same thing has also its dangers. So if the system detects that I'm constantly depressed, yeah, you don't maybe want your insurance know that, because when you want to do a life insurance policy, they might not want you as a customer, right? So it's really important that we own and control this data, and distributed ledger technologies. I really encourage everybody who is in manufacturing and so on to really explore this, because I think it can be the next generation internet.
What do you think about that? People driving in these cars, owning their own data. Does that sound like a great idea, or maybe not?
I think it sounds like a wonderful idea. The user, at the end of the day, should always be in control of his data. Right now, yes, Google tracks you when you surf the internet, because you maybe clicked on an ad, and then, yes, you got a cookie and you get tracked. On the other hand, you're in control of the data right now. If you go to myaccount.google.com, you can see what Google knows about you, what you have done in the past, where you have been, and what you can derive from that what you're interested in. If you're interested in cars or in beauty products or in shoes or whatever, and you have the choice as a user to right now go there and say, no, please don't use that for advertising, for example. And that is, I think, is the key point. The user needs to be in control of data and needs to have mechanisms to be able to control data. If it's a BMW ID or a Google ID, or, well, a disengaged, not central ID, which would be the best solution probably, at the end of the day, right now, we don't have that yet, at least now I don't know of one. So you need to give control to the user to be able to control whatever data he's using, submitting, and giving you.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that before. BMW is really committed to this idea, and I think it's an attitude that we have taken on quite early, and we truly believe in, and we actually have also taken action on that, and it's called Car Data. Is our model, and you can find that on our websites in order to understand how we deal with the topic of privacy and how we want to give control back to the user. I think that's where we are pretty strong. But we have also a strong view, and I also try to mention that on security, because I do believe it is important that at least the company that manufactures the car is able to control as much as possible any interference with their system. And that is, as you said, it's a danger. There's a danger in there, and that's why we're investing heavily into that topic, because we do believe we must make sure that when we now add personal assistants like Google's Assistant or Alexa, that they do not interfere in any way with the car system, and they don't, because that is something where we believe we need to take ownership and control for the benefit of the user. And I think that's also another point where I do believe we have a responsibility, but also an opportunity in order to be relevant for the consumer.
Okay.
If I can add something to that just that
Okay.
discussion point. It's like, you know, when we talk about this digital revolution and we talk about the industrial revolution, and, you know, I think we really need to be very careful that people see the value in data, that they see the opportunity in this digital transformation. And I think the best way to do that is to really put the user in control and have the user decide what they want in terms of also artificial intelligence, right? So that I can decide, do I want to use my data to predict if I will develop cancer or whatever it might be. So I think, and if you think about it, right, today we give away a lot of this data. Yes, we accept terms and maybe we can change settings, but we are not really ultimately today in control. And I think we all should really think hard about how do we think about the data and how do we think about this ownership. And I like to compare it with healthy eating. Yeah? So like, you know, 20 years ago, maybe this movement started that people realized, hey, it's like important what I eat. I maybe shouldn't eat fast food every day and kind of a thing. Yeah. Today we are still in a very, very preliminary age when it comes to understanding the value of our data, right? If we knew the true value of our data, we would not give it away freely, right? But we would be really smart about monetizing that data, and we would have those guys, you know, everybody who wants to use our data, they would need to come to us to ask access to the data, to offer us something for the data. So it would completely change the game. And if you don't know, like, you know, in the early days of the internet, there was actually discussion with Tim Berners-Lee if there should be micropayments on the web, right? So that if you were to visit a website, that there would be the ability to issue a micropayment to the author of that content or the creator of that website. Yeah? So now with blockchain technologies, distributed ledger technologies, we are now maybe taking another approach at trying to enable such a peer-to-peer economy.
I think last question, mentioning what you just said, we need to be aware of the value of our data. I mean, there are studies that say mobility will be free. As you know, if we are ready to give up our data, if we are ready to willingly giving our data away, there will be people who say, hey, if you're going to watch some videos in the car, we will take care of the mobility part. Or if you let your car drive past this shopping mall, this ride will be free.
It will never be free. That's the thing.
I mean,
and
free for the
today is not free.
But free for the
that's
driver.
The thing that people have to learn.
Of course.
Right?
I mean, but Facebook is free,
No, it's not
and
free.
you know, I know. But I mean, do you see these business models coming up? So is this data going to be so valuable that there will be new, you know, players in the field who just say, you know, sit in this beautiful BMW, I'll take care of everything else. You just have to stop by my shop for a moment.
It won't be the only business model or the only thing happening there. That's what I tried to show with that blue line going up. I think there are a lot of those things will be enabled, and of course it's possible, and that's certainly, as far as I understand it, also, let's say, part of the business models of others to really move into that one and create free mobility on the basis of a different paying mechanism. And yes, it's going to happen. But it's not going to be the only one. I think I mean, again, you need to understand that it's really important to make sure everybody understands enabling a car is a costly thing, or a vehicle is a really costly thing. So in one way or another, this cost of, let's say, putting the electronics and all the other stuff in there needs to be somehow monetized throughout the life cycle of that car, in one way or another. And if that is going to happen, the model makes sense, and a lot of, let's say, organizations will participate in that, and I think that's where we really need to fathom the ground. But the idea is, for us at least, to play a major role in there.
Okay, thank you very much for this very inspiring panel. I think we haven't talked a lot about what all this is going to do with our cities and the places we're living in, but there's an extra panel on that later on. So yeah, thanks again, and a big applause for you.